Welcome back to Just Kampers. In this video, we're going to take a little look at a lower ball joint on a T25. With a lever bar placed under the wheel, I'm going to give it some leverage up, and we can actually see the movement here. This is the lower ball joint, this is in the hub, and this is to the lower arm. And you can see how worn this ball joint is. Check this out. You can see from the amount of movement we have on that ball joint that it's in need of replacement. So let's get started and get it swapped out. First things first, we need to remove the road wheel. We need to remove the hub assembly with the brake disc, such brake caliper off as well. Basically try and get down to just the stub axle itself, and then remove the stub axle from the upper and lower arms. Then we can get that ball joint changed. So let's get cracking. Road wheel off. Next I'm going to put some penetrating spray on the parts that I need to remove. So the first part is the track rod end. So let's get some spray on there. Upper ball joint, lower ball joint on the threads, and then on the brake hose as well, just in case I need to remove that brake hose. Cool, onward. So before I remove our brake caliper, the brake pipe itself goes from our flexi to our hard pipe. And there's a little bracket in between, and that little bracket is situated underneath the nut for the upper ball joint. So I've got to take the nut off first before I can slide that bracket off. And then I don't have to remove the hose for the brake caliper. So let's get that bit done first. It's a 24mm on the top. So I've soaked it with plenty of... Yeah. Okay, so I've got a little bit of movement. I'm just going to... There we go. Gently move it, but it's actually... We'll gently work that and pop a bit more spray on it if I need to. That's the 24mm nut off. That means that now that bracket should come loose. Oh, which it does, yeah. So when I unbolt the caliper next, I can pull that down, that bracket, and I'll hang the caliper up because I don't want to put any strain on that flexi hose. So let's get that bit done. Okay, so I'm going to spin those out, and then I'm going to put a little bit of wire through the caliper and put the wire through the chassis here to, as I say, not to put any strain on that flexi hose. Just spin that out. A bit of wire. So I'm going to thread that bit of wire through this part of the chassis here. And I can tie my caliper to that. Second bolt out. Just going to squeeze the caliper a bit. Just go over the slight lip of the brake disc. And then I can pull that bracket off as well at the same time. So there's the bracket that was on obviously the top ball joint. And as I say, I've left the pipe all intact. Now we just pop the wire through the caliper, hang the caliper up. I'm going through one of the top bolt hole. That's tied on, so there's no strain on that flexi brake hose. So I want to remove our brake hub and disc assembly. So I'm going to pop off the little circlip, little E-clip that holds the speedo drive onto the actual grease cap itself. So we just pop them off with a small screwdriver, like so. Little E-clip, and then that should, push through our grease cap. Next thing we need to do is pop off that grease cap. You can do that with a lever bar quite easily. So I've got a fairly short lever bar. And there's a nice little lip on the back of the grease cap. With a gentle tap, spin, gentle tap. Yeah, it's starting to come off. There we go. Nice and easy. Off. Now I can withdraw the speedo cable from the centre of the hub. So you should be able to pull that right the way through. Yeah. Cool. That's that out of the way. Next we need to get this nut undone. This is a 27mm. So I've got my 27mm on here. Should be able to undo that. It's got a locker part on the end of the nut itself, but we can reuse that. Or put a new hub nut on if we need to, but we shouldn't need to. Now we can withdraw the hub assembly. It should just come off, he says. Again, using my thumb so the bearing doesn't fall out. Ah, look at that. Off in one. Perfect. Now off with the backing plate. So we've got 3 screws that hold that backing plate on. Screwdriver, see if I can get these loosened and undone. Oh yeah, that's all right, unmoved. Make sure they're all moved first. Yeah, cool. Spin them out. And we can remove that backing plate and get that out of the way. Beautiful. Now we're getting there. With the use of a pair of side cutters, I'm going to open up our locking device, which goes as a split pin, which goes through our track rod end nut, and actually it's going to come out quite easily. Sometimes they can be a real pain and we have to drill them out, but that's out. Wicked. Now I can undo this nut here and get the track rod end off. Pop our 19mm spanner on. Let's get this undone. It could be pretty tight. Yep, that's pretty tight. Make sure that is set on there nicely. I don't want to round that nut off. We'll do it. Here we go. Yeah, that's pretty tight. Good. Off he comes, and we just need to get this out of the stub axle. Now there are a couple of different methods for removing ball joints like this track rod end from the stub axle itself. First method is using a lovely little ball joint tool. So that ball joint tool has got a fork on it and a thread on the underside. So the fork goes through on this side of our ball joint, and then the thread winds up against the thread of the ball joint and forces it out. If you haven't got a special ball joint tool, you can use a lever bar and a hammer. So we put a lever bar through somewhere and apply a little bit of upward pressure, and then with a hammer carefully bang this part of the stub axle and actually shock that out. If you're going to do that, obviously I would say put the nut back on so we don't slip with the hammer and damage the thread. Also, you have to be careful you don't damage the track rod end itself as well when removing it. But I'll show you both. So I've ball joint removal tool in place. As you can see, I've got it under the head of the track rod end. Obviously take care putting it in and not damaging the actual boot of the track rod end. And the other side is actually under the thread of the track rod end. Then with a spanner, I can spread these apart, which force these together, and that will then just pop that track rod end out. And of course, if you don't have a little ball joint removal tool like this one, you can use a lever bar, a hammer, and a pair of safety specs. I know what you're thinking. You think I used the ball joint removal tool, loosened the ball joint, so when I show you with the lever bar and hammer trick, it all falls apart really easy. Well, I didn't. This is still stuck really fast, and I've only wound that nut back on a couple of threads. Should I slip with the hammer? Not gonna. Let's get to it. Lever bar and hammer and safety specs. Slide the lever bar in over the lower arm and just put a little bit of upward pressure on our track rod end, there on the arm. And then with my hammer, I'm going to shock it through this end part of our steering arm and shock that loose. Let's go for it. Might be a little bit noisy. Now that did take quite a bit of persuasion, a little bit more than usual. Anyhow, the same result. It's loose. I can now take the nut off and we can remove the track rod end. Here we go. From our stub axle or knuckle joint. Looking at our track rod end, you can see on the taper here, there was quite a bit of corrosion. I think that was the key into holding that track rod end in place and not letting it go. Anyway, when we pop that back, we pop that back with a little bit of grease or a little bit of copper grease. Our last part to undo and remove is the lower ball joint nut. This is a 27mm. Hopefully we won't have too much problem undoing that. Not sure yet. It looks like it's been there a while. And then once that's off, we can then remove the stub axle and start the process of changing that lower ball joint over. Right, 27mm onto that nut. Get quite a good purchase on that. I'll see if I can give that a good old go. Yeah, there we go. Oh wow. That was easier than I thought. Pleased with that. Good. Let's get that off. It's coming. Ooh. Nearly, not quite. A bit more spanner. Oh, seems like a really long thread. What we need to do now is release them from the ball joints. Upper ball joint. Okay. Lever bar in here with a little bit of upward pressure. Hammer, and obviously safety specs, and keep your fingers crossed for a minute to make sure this goes nice and easy. There we go, excellent. One more to go. That's our stub axle or steering knuckle assembly off the vehicle and on the bench. Our next move is to remove the very worn out, tired lower ball joint. Let's see how that goes. Not sure what approach I'm going to do yet, but we'll have a look and come up with a plan. Let's check the movement out now it's on the bench. Can you see that? So I think I'm actually going to punch this out rather than use the press. Again, I don't think everybody's got a press at home, and it could actually be quite awkward getting this set up in the press to push that out. But first thing I need to do is remove the snap ring that goes all the way around the outside of the ball joint on this side, and that helps to retain it from pushing through. So let's get rid of that first. Hopefully it'll just pop out. Maybe. There we go. Well, that worked well, didn't it? Popped straight out. Good old magic spray. Then we can get set up in the vise and see if we can punch that through. I've applied a little bit of heat in the shape of a hot air gun, just to try and put a bit of temperature into that casting to allow it to expand slightly, hopefully help me out for knocking that out. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want to put a naked flame on here and heat this up to cherry red. This is a suspension component. I don't really want to be changing the temper of the metal, so hence why I've used the hot air gun. And just try and get a bit of warmth in that. It feels actually quite hot. So I'm going to try and give it a thump. I've got my big heavy hammer and a nice punch. Obviously safety glasses, and we're going to give it a tap and just see if we get any movement at all. Obviously I can't go too mad because I'm not supported across here at the moment. I'm just supported down there on a socket in the vise. But let's see if we get any movement at all. So let's give it a go. Safety specs on. Punch, fairly heavy hammer, and we'll start tapping to see if we can get some movement. Yeah, it's moved slightly. There's a little gap. I can see a little gap underneath now. So I just need to carry on like that, nice and gently, and see if we can get it moved out. So a little bit more heat. A few punches and we'll get it out. Whee! There we have it. One totally worn out ball joint. So I'm just cleaning up where the old ball joint came out of. Just to make it a bit easier to fit the new one. I've just got a little bit of wet and dry paper and a little bit of light oil, penetrating oil on it, just to get rid of all that corrosion before we even attempt to fit the new ball joint. Yeah, it's looking good. As you can see, the face is cleaned up nicely. The inner one's all clean, ready to go. I've also cleaned this top face here, as this is where the ball joint is going to sit down too. So we want that nice and flat and free of corrosion. So we are pretty much ready to go. We have a couple of options when it comes to actually fitting the ball joint. So we could use a press and press it into position. Obviously, if you haven't got a press, you could probably get your local engineering firm to press it in for you. Again, if you're not going to go down that route, which I'm not going to, I'm going to show you how to do it with just some tools that you would have at home, possibly. So I first thought that perhaps I was going to use a socket to go over the top. Although it fits on there nice without the ball joint, when it's on the ball joint, unfortunately the socket becomes off too much of an angle, so I wouldn't be pressing it in nice and square. So that is a definite no-no. So I think we're going to go back to heating this up with our heat gun, our hot air gun, and then just going to drift this in place nice and gently. We're going to tap it around evenly using the same punch that I punched it out with in the first place. So I've got some heat into the actual stub axle itself. I've put a lick of grease around the part of where the ball joint is actually going to sit also. So I'm going to grab my hammer and punch and see if we can just gently drift this into place. Make sure that the flat lines up at the back. And we're just going to gently start. With a little bit of patience, I've managed to knock that ball joint all the way down to where it needs to be. So we can now get the circlip on the back. So just a little bit of patience and the use of a very handy aluminium drift and a copper hammer, obviously. Now I can pop the circlip on. Quite stiff, these clips, but I'll start with the cut end over that side and gently try and walk it round and clip it on. Look at that. Perfect. Well, there we have it. That's the new lower ball joint pushed into the stub axle or steering knuckle. It's time to get it back on the vehicle. I'm going to start by popping a little bit of grease back onto the tapers. So if we ever have to sort of take it apart again, it should come apart a little bit easier. Just pop a little bit of grease on the top one. And a little bit on the thread, that won't hurt. So you can use copper grease or just normal wheel bearing grease. A bit inside the taper there, and a bit on the end of the track rod end. Cool. So now we can get our stub axle or steering knuckle reinstalled. So we'll pop the bottom one in first and see if we can get a couple of threads on the nut. I'm going to nip that up now. '27 on it, the big one. Yep. Just so we can pull it home into the taper, and then I can pop the top ball joint in. So I'll get cracking with that. Just a little point to mention, if you're trying to do your nylock nut up and you're finding that the taper is actually spinning inside itself, what we need to do is apply a little bit of pressure to this top wishbone. With the use of a lever bar against the spring, we can just pull down enough to push that taper seated. Once that taper is seated nicely inside, then we can do the nylock nut up. So that's us all back together, just a road wheel to go on. Please subscribe to keep up to date with future videos. And thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.